For the stories we're watching right now. A surprise public hearing called by the House Select Committee looking into the January 6th insurrection. What we know about the recently obtained evidence, which will be presented at the hearing tomorrow. The Supreme Court issuing its second ruling in favor of religious rights, saying a public school football coach's prayer on the 50-yard line is protected by the Constitution. It follows a ruling in favor of a religiously affiliated school, saying the state cannot withhold funding because of their faith-based views. The impacts of federally protected abortion rights being overturned continue to reverberate throughout the nation as President Biden promises to take executive action to protect reproductive rights. And later this hour, more legal showdowns are popping up as states move to protect or deny abortion rights after the Supreme Court's controversial ruling, where so-called trigger laws are going into effect and where they're being fought. Plus, new numbers out showing a marked increase of attempted crossings at the southern border. What we know about where people are coming from and the latest move by the Biden administration to try and tackle the issue. But first, we begin with a last-minute January 6th hearing. The House Select Committee announced today it will hold another public hearing tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, to hear, quote, recently obtained evidence and witness testimony. The committee previously said it would not hold any additional hearings until July, with Chairman Benny Thompson saying it was likely the hearings would not resume until the House is back from its July 4th recess, which is set to last until July 11th. So a last-minute change here. And for more on this and the day's top political stories, Kyle Cheney and Elena Treen join me now. Kyle is senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, and Elena is congressional reporter at Axios. So, Kyle, let's begin with what else you can tell us about this new hearing set for tomorrow.
Well, unfortunately, not very much. I mean, what we know is that the committee, is attempting to run a very well and carefully choreographed set of hearings. So to suddenly drop a major hearing less than 24 hours in advance suggests that there's some real urgency behind whatever it is they intend to unveil. As you pointed out, they weren't going to come back till actually mid-July. So the fact that they suddenly dropped this on the calendar, it apparently was secretive even to some members of the committee or some staffers on the committee. This is supposed to be a quiet week while they reassess the evidence they had, now turning into anything but.
So it raises the prospect, if not the likelihood, this will look a lot different than the previous hearings, could be shorter and a little less pre-production.
I would, you'd think, again, we don't know much about the nature of the evidence. We're trying to wrap our heads around what could require this level of urgency, that what couldn't wait until mid-July, what decisions are coming down, or what concerns do they have about the integrity of the evidence they're going to present. So we don't know much, but yes, it could be a very different type of hearing than what we've seen before.
Meanwhile, there's a grand jury testimony still ongoing and a criminal prosecution still ongoing. Kyle, what can you tell us about the testimony from Friday in the January 6 cases?
So, I mean, the select committee is were you referring to a specific grand jury example, or are you talking about
I'm sorry,
Jeffrey Clark?
Exactly. We know about this evolving investigation. What's the latest you have on it?
Sure. So, I mean, essentially what's going on is there's what's become very clear an active and increasingly active set actions by federal investigators looking into efforts related to Donald Trump attempting to overturn the election. And what we've seen is a search at the home of former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark in Morton, Virginia. That's come at the same time prosecutors have executed search warrants or issued grand jury subpoenas to people who tried to act as false electors for Trump in various states. And we've even just learned moments ago that John Eastman, the top lawyer who was helping Donald Trump try to execute this plan, had his phone seized last week. So this is a very rapidly developing situation at the federal prosecutorial level, in parallel to the January 6th committee.
A lot of simultaneous balls in the air. Thanks for buttoning that up for us, Kyle. Elena, you have some new reporting about another figure who's been part of these hearings, Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy, about some possible headaches on the horizon for Mr. McCarthy. Walk us through this.
Yes. Well, Scott, a lot of people within Republican leadership and some of the outside Republican groups and campaign arms are a little bit worried about the number of surging far right and controversial candidates that are in primaries, winning primaries, and could potentially win the general election in November. And there is a question of how many of these candidates could win and whether they will be what they're calling political disruptors and potential headaches for Kevin McCarthy if he is to become speaker. And we've seen this already. I mean, there's candidates like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Paul Gosar, all candidates who kind of think of themselves as untouchable in a sense and can really push the limit and go against McCarthy and some of his plans. And that would be, even more dramatic if he becomes speaker and if Republicans take back the House. And so there is this dynamic that people within leadership are quietly examining. And I think one really interesting note as well is that McCarthy himself is really not getting very involved in interfering in some of these primaries. And he's learned his lesson from past elections where some of these candidates who he was opposing did become or were elected and are part of Congress. And he's hoping that he can earn some goodwill with them now rather than alienate them. And so a lot of things to be looking for. And we'll know more, of course, in the weeks ahead and as these primaries play out. But it's definitely a dynamic that could really become problematic for Kevin McCarthy and others within House GOP leadership.
Now, Elena, this was a year in which the political issues were dominated by gas and grocery prices until the last few weeks, in which the January 6 hearings that Kyle was reporting on have become prominent. And, of course, the Supreme Court ruling has become supremely prominent this week and this month. So, Elena, what potential executive actions do you think the president can use to address this abortion issue now that Roe versus Wade's been struck down and now that it is so prominent?
Well, it's a great question, Scott, but it's also a hard one to answer now because President Biden himself has said, and the White House continues to say, that they're very limited in what they can do at an executive level. But we do see progressives coming out, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, Pramila Jayapal, all really trying to ramp up pressure on President Biden to do something from the executive level. And they've proposed things like paying for people to travel, federal employees to travel to different states if they seek an abortion, looking at whether they can open clinics on federal land, something that is unclear whether is legal given the Hyde Amendment, but something that they really want the White House to examine more closely. Looking at trying to help people within the military obtain funds and be able to travel as well if they so choose to seek an abortion, all things that progressives are demanding that the White House, at minimum, looks into and potentially rolls out. But they really do want Biden and the White House to do more here. The White House, again, has been holding a lot of these details close to the vest about what they may do. But they say that they're planning on rolling out some things in the short term. And, that is frustrating, I think, to a lot of people and a lot of these progressive members, but many Democrats as well, just given that because of Politico, that leak from a couple months ago or several weeks now, everyone was kind of anticipating this decision. And so people are saying we should have been ready. Democrats, the White House, leadership should have been ready for this potential decision.
All right, Elena, I want to interject for one moment. We have some developing news in Mendon, Missouri. The state highway officials are now briefing us on an Amtrak train crash. Let's go to Mendon right now.
To obtain as much information as we can at this part in the investigation. I want to stress that the information we have now available is preliminary. This is an active and ongoing investigation at the scene. That's going to take us several more hours to work through this today and late into this evening and tomorrow as well, most likely. With me today is Corporal Justin Dunn. He's the Troop B Public Information Officer. He'll have a short statement for you here in just a moment. And also with me today is the Sheridan County Sheriff, Eric Billups. Thank you all.
As Lieutenant Brown said, my name is Justin Dunn. I am a corporal with the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and I am the Troop B Public Information Education Officer. The statement that we're going to release at this time reference the derailment of the train is at approximately 12:43 p.m. today. The Sheridan County 911 Center received a 911 call of a vehicle struck by a train on Porsche Prairie Avenue in Sheridan County, southwest of Mendon, Missouri. At approximately 13:02, first responders began to arrive on the scene. Preliminary investigation indicates an Amtrak passenger train traveling to Chicago, Illinois, struck a dump truck. at the railroad crossing of Porsche Prairie Avenue. It's an uncontrolled crossing. The train had approximately 8 cars, including a baggage car. 7 cars have derailed. There are multiple injuries, and we can confirm there are 3 fatalities, 2 on the train and 1 in the dump truck. Personnel are currently working to secure the scene. The train had approximately 207 passengers, as well as crew members. All injured and uninjured occupants of the train have been transported from the scene. Multiple law enforcement agencies, ambulance districts, first responders, fire departments, and medical helicopters responded to assist. Agencies involved including are the Sheridan County, Lynn County, Macon County, Randolph County Sheriff's Offices, the Brookfield and Macon Police Departments, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, the Missouri Department of Conservation, the Missouri State Park Rangers, the Missouri State Fire Marshals, the State Emergency Management, ambulance from the Sheridan County, Lynn County, Randolph County, Livingston County, Macon County, Howard County, Carroll County, and Caldwell County. Also transported with medical helicopters, transported medical services responded to the scene. Each agency transported multiple victims. Officials from Amtrak are responding to the scene, and the NTSB has been advised. The investigation is in its preliminary stages, and as more information becomes available, we will be releasing it at that time. Thank you.
As we stressed here, this is the beginning of a lengthy investigation. We have a lot more information we are seeking and need to obtain. Also with me are members of the Sheridan County Commission. We will provide updates as they are available. They can be found on our patrol's Twitter page at MSHP Trooper B. Updated information will be there as quickly as we can, and we will address more questions as we get more information. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Are you going to take any questions here?
We'll take some afterwards.
Will you take some right now?
We can try, but it probably not be much we can talk about at this point.
So there was as many as 243 passengers. He just said a total of 207. Can you confirm how many passengers and how many crew members?
All right, we're like I said, preliminary. We're still working with officials from Amtrak and our members at the scene. We know there's an excess of 200 passengers on the train and approximately 14 crew, but I cannot give you an exact number at this point in time because it's not something that I personally have been able to verify.
Do you have a number of how many injured?
No idea on the number injured at this point.
At the railroad crossing, are there flashing lights? Are there arms?
It's an uncontrolled crossbuck intersection on a gravel road, so no lights, no electronic control devices, things such as that.
So that's pretty common to this area then?
A lot of your rural intersections are that way, yes.
Do you know what hospitals these victims were transported to?
We area hospitals in the surrounding counties, and obviously the area vac, the medical helicopters have transported those patients to applicable trauma centers in the area as well, but that's not information I have at this time either.
Do you have any information on what safety measures they had in place at this time?
Nope, not at this time. Nothing that I can discuss at that point, because just not familiar with exactly what occurred at the scene.
We saw several relocation centers as we were on the way here. Is there a place that you were taking those that weren't injured? Because, you know, there was a lot of passengers that were on there
sure.
that weren't injured.
With assistance of the public and some other area entities here in the immediate Sheridan County area, the uninjured parties and injured parties were taken to the area hospitals and also to another safe location where the uninjured went until arrangements can be made to finish their travels. That's not known at this time, ma'am. It's something they're, as they complete this investigation, more details of how that crash occurred will be released.
You said there were 7 cars that derailed. Do you know how many cars were on this that were connected here?
I believe there's 8 total cars, including a baggage car. But as far as, that's the best information that I have at this point in time.
And do you know if those fatalities that you reported are crew or passengers?
I do not know. No. All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll get more information to you as soon as we can.
was a briefing with the Missouri State Highway Patrol. The Southwest Chief Amtrak train derailed en route from Los Angeles to Chicago near Mendon, Missouri. At least 3 deaths among the 200-plus passengers and nearly 12 crew members. A dump truck was on the tracks, according to that briefing. The train collided with the dump truck operator, the driver, or somebody inside that truck, among those who died. Updates are coming from Amtrak. Updates are coming from state officials in Missouri. Want to rejoin the conversation we interrupted for that update with Elena Treen and Kyle Cheney. We thank you both for bearing with us. We wanted to get that update in as soon as possible. Kyle, I want to go back to you. We were talking about the Supreme Court, among the many things you're tackling right now with your reporting. Looking at the perceptions around the Chief Justice after what happened Friday and his grip on this high court after what happened Friday. What's your latest reporting?
I mean, it's clear this is not John Roberts' court, and I think you've seen him labor over the years to try to build the the court sort of in his image as someone who is not extreme and someone who likes to find at least some semblance of a compromise among the various wings of the court. What you saw was a justice Chief Justice who's essentially isolated. He signed his own concurring opinion. He joined the majority essentially, but took great issue with their rationale and said, look, why do we have all this certainty around this issue? Really, if the majority or the minority, we should have more humility than that. But he was isolated. He was alone. He was the only one who signed that opinion. It shows he probably hoped that he could convince at least a couple of his colleagues to join something like that. He could not. And if there's any illusion about who's running the court, it's clear that the Chief Justice is not it.
Yeah, his voice can be heard, but it's the other voices on the court that have been dominating over the last few rulings and the last few days, with more rulings expected in the days ahead. Kyle Cheney, Elena Treen, you gave us extra time tonight. Thanks for your patience and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And CBS News will have all-day coverage of tomorrow's January 6th committee hearing, expected to get underway at about 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll have coverage in the lead-up and after it wraps with our team of correspondents and our team of analysts. You can stream it right here on CBS News. Earlier today, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a former football coach at a Western Washington State high school who lost his job after praying on the 50-yard line after games. The court sided with Joseph Kennedy in a 6-3 ruling, saying the free exercise and free speech clauses in the First Amendment protect an individual engaging in religious expression. The school district, meanwhile, argued his activities violated the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government from endorsing a religion. The ruling itself broke down ideological lines, with the 6 conservative judges, including Chief Justice Roberts, siding with the majority. For more, CBS News chief political analyst and senior national correspondent John Dickerson joins me now. So, John, this is the second time in a week the Supreme Court has made rulings extending protections for religion. What do these cases indicate about the historic role of faith in public life in the U.S. and how it may have shifted in recent years?
Well, the case last week was that the court ruled that Maine could not deny state funding to religious schools. So those are 2 rulings in favor of religious practice. And if you look back, a study was done of the Roberts Court. And it came out in April of last year, it found that 81%, there's been an 81% increase in rulings that favor religious institutions under Chief Justice John Roberts. And so it has increased significantly. These latest 2 rulings are in keeping with that trend. And then I would also add that the study also found that what differentiates the Roberts Court rulings on religion is that they tend to be in favor of Christian practice, Christianity, whereas previous rulings on previous courts have been in favor of minority religious rights. So those are 2 big ways in which this court has supported the practice of religion in the public square.
But it's not just a legal moment, it's a cultural moment as well. I mean, we sense that as we talk to people in our social circles, in our street, on our jobs. Give us some sense of the cultural significance of the court striking down such a landmark ruling.
Well, you mean with respect to abortion, or
Absolutely.
With respect to, yes. Well, so abortion, when you look at this court and what it's been doing, it's an extraordinary period we're in right now, where you have the abortion decision, these 2 rulings on religion, and then also the gun case. But let's focus on religion, on abortion. changing abortion and the way it's treated by the courts for the first time in 50, well, not the first time, but so radically in 50 years is something we have to be very humble about in terms of the way it's shaking out. But we know a couple of things. We know that in the immediate polling, women, in the CBS poll, 67% of women disapprove of this decision. By a factor of 3 to 1, women said it will make their lives worse. So that's one huge cultural response. With respect to those who are against abortion rights, this is the payoff for 50 years of hard, consistent work at the wrong end of the cultural movements in America. That is an enormous cultural victory for that movement. I think it also reframes the way anybody must think about the Trump presidency. As Ken Starr, the conservative legal light, put it a year ago, he said that Donald Trump's picks for the Supreme Court cover up a multitude of sins. And this ruling, which is a result of the justices he put on the court, clearly makes him even more of a hero in that group. And then I think finally you have, and again, we have to be humble about where the public will end up on this, but we have a court that is far more political than it once was. You have Republican Senator Susan Collins saying that Justice Kavanaugh misled her about his position on abortion. So you have a senator calling into question the ethics and morality of one of the justices. That's a big deal, and that will further erode. And then finally, the decision itself undoes a precedent. And the reason precedent is held in such high regard is that it adds some stability to the cultural shocks. And when that stability is gone, it can lead, or so the theory goes, to more volatility in politics and the culture.
Would you expect this ruling to push abortion rights to the forefront of the midterm elections or 2024, or is that just too far away?
I think, well, there are lots of reasons it could. We've seen campaigns are more national and ever more so for the last, say, 20 years. And on the left, abortion, raising money to protect abortion rights has been a big part of the liberal cause. On the right, you've seen those who want to do away with abortion raising a lot of money and advocacy with respect to that position. Those two things will be true all the way through our modern politics. That will still be the case. What's interesting is to see how close races treat this issue, and that's still playing out. It is in these initial days after the ruling, the left is certainly fired up. We've seen the marches, we've seen the rage. And again, it's not just about abortion. It's about the fundamental question for women about who controls their decision making. If that is still the case, and Democratic lawmakers make the case that that's what this ruling is about, then that will play a role. But again, as you know very well, it only plays a role that is meaningful if it's in those battleground states in the House or those close races in the Senate. Lots of marches in deep blue areas won't have much of an effect on those races. So that's another thing to watch for.
Yeah, John Dickerson, great context there. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Scott.
President Biden is attending the G7 summit in Germany today, where the group of leaders are discussing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to the leaders this morning and said his country is in need of more military, financial, and humanitarian assistance as Ukrainian soldiers continue to push back against Russian forces. The U.S. is set to announce it's buying surface-to-air missile systems for Kyiv. That's according to the Associated Press. G7 nations are also discussing further sanctions on Russia. The controversial ruling overturning Roe v. Wade setting off a new wave of new laws and new proposals across the nation. More on the dozen or so states which immediately moved to ban abortion following the federal ruling, and the multiple legal fights just beginning. And later, in the wake of Russia's military assault on Ukraine, NATO says they're drastically expanding its high readiness forces, where those troops are headed and what they'll be doing. You're streaming Red and Blue.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail. We experience the weather in a whole new way.
When Roe versus Wade was overturned Friday, a number of states had abortion bans ready to take effect. Trigger laws in 13 states banned abortion immediately or soon after Roe was repealed, meaning the federal ruling triggers a state law banning abortion to go into effect. Some states are already seeing legal challenges to their trigger laws, and there are more lawsuits likely to follow. Joining us now for more is Greer Donnelly, an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh Law School and an expert on reproductive law. And Professor Donnelly, we appreciate your joining us. What is happening now across the country in terms of these trigger laws?
Yeah, so I mean, once the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, our system, which had a national right to abortion, all of a sudden was now a patchwork of state-by-state laws. So as you mentioned, 13 states have trigger laws that were on the books. It's worth noting that every state's trigger law is different. In general, there are 3 different types of trigger laws. So there are some trigger laws that took effect immediately. There are some trigger laws that are supposed to take effect in 30 days. And then there are another group of trigger laws that take effect after some sort of a procedural action by a governor, by some sort of state official. And so right now it looks like roughly 9 states already have abortion bans that are being enforced in just the past few days.
It is noticeable how those states are contiguous as we look at the map there. Professor, today a judge in Louisiana temporarily blocked enforcement of that state's trigger law. What are you looking for as that legal battle escalates and perhaps goes national?
Yeah, I mean, again, so every state is going to be their own, or going to have their own battles to look forward to. So the types of laws and the types of legal challenges we're starting to see are varied across state, and that's based on the state's own law. So some of the challenges are based on the state constitutional provision. So you see some of these challenges saying, hey, the state constitution in this particular state actually protects the right to abortion. So even though the federal constitution doesn't, the state constitution does. There have been many states that have actually found that their state constitution protects this right. So that's one of the theories that people are pursuing in this new world. But you also have litigants who are saying that these laws are unconstitutionally vague, or that, you know, in some cases you have states that are trying to enforce them before perhaps the time has happened for the trigger law. So in Texas, for instance, it's not supposed to take effect until 30 days, but there are some people saying that it's taking effect now. So you have a variety of different challenges that are happening across the country that are really based on what the parties think are the best legal strategies for that state.
Well, what about the states that banned abortion before Roe versus Wade, before the 1970s? What happens in those states?
Yeah, so again, this is just kind of the theme, right? It's all going back to the states. So the pre-Roe bans, and there were about 9 states that had pre-Roe bans on the books, they also fit into different categories. So in some states, you have pre-Roe bans on the books that had been enjoined by a court. So a court had previously said, because of Roe versus Wade, you cannot enforce this statute anymore. In that case, you know, the pre-Roe laws are not going to just immediately come back to life. They're going to have to go back to court and get a court to lift that injunction. In other places, there is no injunction, right? The state officials just stopped enforcing the ban. So in those states, theoretically, they could come back to life. But again, that is something that's going to be litigated as well. Can a law that's over 50 years old, just that has been, you know, deemed unconstitutional for so long, come back to life immediately? And we'll see those battles play out. Sorry.
We see new battles coming, too, that are about to play out. We saw South Dakota's governor, Kristi Noem, say yesterday she plans on banning mail-order abortion pills. Are there any challenges for her state doing that legally or constitutionally?
Yes. So, abortion pills are definitely the future of abortion access in this country. Historically, abortion provision used to happen by a procedure, but the most recent data we have suggests that the majority of abortions in this country actually happen by pills now. So medication abortion is a 2-drug regimen that can be used up through 10 weeks of pregnancy to safely end a pregnancy. Medication abortion really opens up doors for abortion access because it can be sent through the mail, it can be obtained via telehealth, and you have organizations like Aid Access and Plan C that are helping folks access medication abortion even in states where it might be banned. So certainly the anti-abortion movement knows that this is one of the existential crises that it'll be facing in the future, and it is looking for every opportunity it can to try to ban pills from coming into their state. But the battle's on both sides. So there's arguments from the abortion rights perspective as well, that actually medication abortion, because it's regulated by the FDA, the federal government controls it, the states do not. So we're going to see, again, a lot of kind of conflicts coming up between the federal government and the state government, and states trying to see how they can control the pills from entering their state borders.
Greer Donnelly, a lot to corral this week. We appreciate you giving us time and giving us your expertise.
Thank you.
Still ahead on Red and Blue, brand new CBS News polling out on abortion, the midterms, and public sentiment about the January 6th hearings. Our Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, is here to break it all down. Plus, Russia announces a court date for WNBA star Brittany Griner, while also forcing her to remain in prison for several more months. The latest on her case and the U.S. government's efforts to bring her home. You're streaming CBS News.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Here's a look at some of our top stories. President Biden and other G7 leaders reaffirmed support for Ukraine during a virtual meeting with President Zelensky Monday. The U.S. is preparing to send the nation a medium to long-range missile system, along with a host of other equipment to help Ukraine defend itself from Russia's military assault. The leaders are also considering new economic restrictions aimed at punishing Moscow. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of a former high school football coach who lost his job for praying on the field after games. In the 6-3 ruling, justices said free exercise and free speech clauses of the First Amendment protect people engaging in religious expression. Law enforcement around the country remain on high alert following a weekend of nationwide protests over the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade. Democrats are hoping the ruling will drive voters to the polls for the midterm election, while some Republicans think it will have little effect on voter turnout. Natalie Brand has more from Capitol Hill.
Protesters returned to the U.S. Supreme Court for a fourth straight day after the conservative majority sent the issue of abortion back to individual states.
Abortion rights! Abortion rights!
More than a dozen have so-called trigger laws in place to restrict or ban abortion since Roe v. Wade was overturned, with several more states expected to follow suit in the coming weeks. Mississippi, the state at the heart of the case that led to the Supreme Court's ruling that struck down Roe, certified its trigger law Monday, banning nearly all abortions in 10 days.
The thing that's going to keep me up at night is the women who will lose their lives because they don't have access to care.
But in Louisiana, a civil district court judge has already temporarily blocked the state's trigger laws from taking effect after providers sued.
As a new legal fight begins, Democratic leaders believe the issue of abortion will become key for upcoming midterm elections for the U.S. Congress and at the state level.
We recognize this is just the beginning.
I think this is likely to all be litigated out, dealt with in the various states around the country through the Democratic process.
Meanwhile, leaders in blue states like New York are preparing for a possible influx of women from states with restrictions.
They've been preparing on how do we build the infrastructure so we're here for those women who come into the city for looking for services.
16 Democratic states and Washington, D.C. have laws to protect abortion rights. Natalie Brandt, CBS News, Washington.
New CBS News polling shows most Americans disapprove of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe versus Wade. 2/3 of women surveyed said they're against the ruling, and more than half believe it will make their lives worse. Approval of the decision is the highest among people who identify as conservatives and evangelical Christians. Joining me now with more, CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. So, Anthony, you found the majority disapproves of the court's overturning of Roe versus Wade. But break down how that might impact the midterms in November.
How you doing, Scott? So let me show you one question that we asked, and it's, does the overturning make you more or less likely to vote in November, or does it make no difference? Now, the thing I want to point out here is the difference between Democrats and Republicans on this, because you see that 50% of Democrats said it made them more likely, and there's a big gap between that and the Republicans who said so. And, you know, there's a couple of theories on this. One is that maybe people are more likely to get motivated for something that they have lost rather than a reward. And, of course, for the conservative movement, a lot of people see this as a big victory. So that could explain the differential. The other part of this is a lot of these folks on the Democratic side are already voters. So it could just be a reaction right now. Say, yes, we're going to be motivated. I think the thing to watch in this is not just one snapshot poll. It's, do people who normally would not vote in midterms say as we go through the fall that they're more activated and they're more motivated? So it really sets up something that we pollsters and other campaign people are going to want to watch and are going to want to track to see if this manifests itself, Scott.
There may be an enthusiasm that was already there before the ruling. Could that manifest itself in these numbers, that perhaps either Democrats or Republicans were already fired up to vote in November?
I think normally in a midterm, you see the opposition party who is already fired up. They've lost the last time, or they think they did, and they want another chance at it. You often have the president's party, the incumbent party, have a harder time revving up its voters. So in the sense that maybe the Democrats use this to try to close that gap, that's the thing we've got to track.
Sure. You also have some new numbers on the January 6th hearings. Are those hearings breaking through in any noticeable way?
Well, let me tell you. Start with this, Scott. Do you think that the president, former President Donald Trump, planned to, and then there's 50% that say they think he tried to stay in office through illegal means? And that exceeds the number who thinks he tried to stay in office through a legal process or didn't plan to stay at all. Now, you and I have talked about this in similar things before. What do you make of that 50%? On one hand, for context, you think, well, in a democracy, the fact that half the country thinks that a sitting president tried that might be something notable. On the other hand, you know, Democrats might say, wait, it's only 50%? And that's frankly because Democrats are paying more attention to these hearings than Republicans are, as one explanation for that. And the other part of this, Scott, is the descriptions of what happened. Well, they still show that Democrats are more likely to call it an insurrection, trying to overthrow the government. But for Republicans, this really hasn't moved. And there's this divide in the party that we'll talk more about, which is half of Republicans call it, and have called it really since it happened, defending freedom or patriotism. So very different interpretations there, Scott.
I'm really struck by that trying to overthrow the government number, the split in party, because the January 6th committee has been pretty unequivocal. That's what they say was happening. It may speak to viewership or the audience they're reaching.
Yeah, and your reporting on this has been so good. It's the fact that this is happening and has happened more in registering among Democrats, much more so than Republicans. You know, we've seen this since the outset. Republicans have been, skeptical of the idea that they need to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th. They told us that in the polling. And then now they tell us that they're not paying as much attention to it. So, look, even in a hyper-partisan environment, if you're imagining that there could be some persuasion going on, which frankly we don't see a lot of, you really don't see Republicans paying attention to those points. And these splits in the parties between defending freedom and patriotism among Republicans, they go to larger splits that I think are playing out now in the primaries, where you're seeing a lot of candidates talking about 2020, talking about, you know, what people call the big lie, the grievances that they still have about what might have happened in 2020. Of course, they've been disproven. Those candidates many of them are doing well, Scott.
What about the former president's numbers? They being affected by all this?
Yeah, let's take a look. A couple of things. One is, if you look at people who vote in the primaries among Republicans, the people who do are more likely than the people who don't vote as often to say that January 6th was about patriotism and about defending freedom. So that's one point. And then the other thing about the former president, one thing we asked Scott is, do you consider yourself part of the MAGA movement? And for those people who vote always in primaries, they're more likely to consider themselves part of the MAGA movement than people who vote infrequently. And so when you talk about the former president's influence, you know, he's endorsed a lot of candidates out there. A lot of candidates are trying to tie themselves to him. And what you see is that even though you see splits in the Republican Party about what happened, you see that the primaries are being more impacted by people who are more on the former president's side, Scott.
Yeah, he doesn't have a 1,000 batting average, but that is sobering for the candidates tomorrow, for example, in Illinois, who do not have his endorsement. Anthony Salvanto, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Biden administration officials have confirmed to CBS News the White House is preparing to send more military aid to Ukraine. The administration plans to purchase a medium to long-range surface-to-air defense missile system for the war-torn nation this week. Ukrainian officials stressed the need for more air defense systems Monday after a Russian missile targeted a busy shopping center in the central city of Kremenchuk. The area's regional governor says at least 10 civilians were killed and 40 others were injured. The attack comes one day after Russian forces targeted the capital city of Kyiv for the first time in weeks. At least one person was killed and 6 others injured in a missile strike that hit a residential area there Sunday morning. Search and rescue operations are still underway. NATO is planning to significantly boost the number of troops deployed to the alliance's high readiness forces. NATO's Secretary General says the force will increase to 300,000 troops. That's up from 40,000 and will deploy to NATO countries that border Russia. The alliance will also list Russia as the most significant and direct threat to its security. The announcement comes ahead of the NATO summit on Tuesday in Madrid. A trial for WNBA star Brittany Griner begins in Russia on Friday. The basketball player, who's been detained in the country for more than 4 months, was briefly seen during a preliminary hearing Monday. In addition to the court date, authorities extended her detention for another 6 months. Russian authorities claim she was arrested for trying to smuggle cannabis oil in her luggage. Roger Karstens, the negotiator who helped free former Marine Trevor Reed from Russian captivity, is leading a team in charge of Griner's release. Meanwhile, Russia has defaulted on its foreign debt for the first time in more than a century. The country owns the equivalent of $100 million in interest payments alone. The funds were due on May 27th with a 30-day grace period that expired Sunday night. Kremlin officials are denying the default, saying they made the payments last month, but that the transfer was blocked due to Western sanctions. We are awaiting a Supreme Court decision on the so-called Remain in Mexico policy. More on whether or not the Trump-era initiative forcing those seeking asylum in the U.S. to wait in Mexico while their fate is decided is coming up. Plus, new numbers on attempted crossings at the southern border. You're streaming Red and Blue.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
The Supreme Court will rule on the Trump-era Remain in Mexico immigration policy in the coming days. Lower courts have not allowed the Biden administration to end this policy, which lets the Department of Homeland Security send asylum seekers to Mexico while the U.S. decides their fate. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez is with me now. Camilo, how will the outcome of this Remain in Mexico case actually affect the border policy?
Hi, Scott. We expect the Supreme Court this week to decide whether the Biden administration can end the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, which the Trump administration used to require 70,000 migrants to wait outside of the U.S. while their asylum cases were adjudicated. President Biden, on his first day in office, suspended this policy, but Republican-led states last year convinced a federal judge to order this program's reinstatement. The court ruling may have a limited immediate impact on U.S. border policy, Scott, however, because the Biden administration has so far implemented Remain in Mexico on a very limited scale since it reinstated it back in December. Only about 7,000 migrants have been enrolled in the program in a few months. However, this ruling could have broader implications on U.S. border policy and on whether states and organizations can get lower court judges, Scott, to reverse immigration decisions by the executive branch. It is also very critical to underscore that this case is part of a larger legal and political battle between Republican-led states and the Biden administration over the future of U.S. border policy. We have already seen, Scott, multiple Republican-led lawsuits force the Biden administration to reverse many of its immigration decisions, including its limits on ICE arrests and its decision to terminate those Title 42 expulsions along the U.S.-Mexico border.
But that's the thing. There are so many of these legal challenges and policy changes. So much of this is so fluid. We know the Biden administration has suspended that policy that limits arrests made by immigration and customs enforcement agents. What does that mean for those ICE agents on the ground?
Yeah, this is yet another loss in federal court for the Biden administration's immigration agenda, Scott. These rules by Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas instructed ICE agents to focus on arresting immigrants deemed to threaten national security or public safety, as well as migrants who recently crossed the U.S.-Mexico border illegally. They generally shielded and protected immigrants with clean criminal records who had arrived in the U.S. before November of 2020 from arrest and deportation. But Republican-led states sued the Biden administration over these policies and convinced a federal judge to declare them unlawful. Now, ICE agents do not have any official instructions, Scott, on whom they should be detaining or whom they should not be detaining here in the U.S. because of civil immigration violations.
I think it's important to put some context behind that and look retrospectively. How do those rules compare to the ICE policies under former President Trump, former President Obama, for the decade or two before now?
That's a critical question, Scott. The Obama administration also placed restrictions on ICE arrests, but those rules were less restrictive than the ones put in place by the Biden administration during President Obama's 8 years in office, ICE carried out approximately 3 million deportations. He earned the nickname the Porter-in-Chief by progressive activists who were frustrated by his immigration policies. But his administration, Scott, argued that he was prioritizing the deportation of immigrants with criminal convictions as well as recent border crossers. The Trump administration reversed all of President Obama's immigration actions when it came to ICE policy, but it was not able to meet those very high deportation levels, even with the broader deportation priorities. The Trump administration recorded about 1 million deportations by ICE during 4 years, and there were really 3 main reasons for that, Scott. One was that more and more jurisdictions across the U.S. refused to collaborate with the Trump administration and declined to transfer immigrants to ICE custody. Also, the coronavirus pandemic forced ICE to scale back enforcement in 2020 and in 2021. And lastly, of course, Scott, Mr. Trump did not win re-election.
A lot of this aligns with red states and blue states, these local communities and their cooperation with ICE.
That's right, and this is part of a larger symptom, Scott, that stems from Congress's inaction on this issue. Because Republicans and Democrats have not been able to forge a compromise on this issue, different administrations undertake radically different stances on immigration and border policy, and the way that these policies continue or do not continue all depends on lawsuits and litigation in federal court.
Camilo Montoya Galvez, uniquely masterful on border policy. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, we'll take a quick break now, which means you have a couple of minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. You can catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. And while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus. We have a mountain of content for you to stream there as well, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like,
wow! Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there are hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
This week on 60 Minutes.
That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 minutes, 60 minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Tom.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait,
There's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative,
Da-da-da-da.
and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
people from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Tens of thousands of suburban swing voters are switching from the Democratic Party to the Republican. That's according to voter registration data analyzed by the Associated Press. The AP found that over 1 million voters switched to the GOP last year across 42 states. That's compared to about 630,000 who became Democrats. The data shows suburban voters who moved away from the Republican Party during the Trump administration are swinging back to the GOP. Major corporations are quickly responding to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Trinity Chavez shows us what some of them are doing.
With emotions spilling over into violence, corporate America is watching and beginning to cautiously shape policies for the end of Roe versus Wade.
I think it really comes down to equal access to care.
A number of major companies say they will cover expenses for workers choosing to travel out of state for abortion services. Some made that call weeks ago after a leaked draft of the Supreme Court opinion, including the review platform Yelp.
I think that for companies who care about issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, they can't sit by and be silent on this issue because it really does impact every aspect of a woman's life.
But not all major companies are taking a public stance. In a Reuters poll of major U.S. law firms, most stayed quiet.
That silence is in part because of fear of backlash over one of the country's most highly charged issues. Companies that have expressed more conservative views in the past have largely chosen not to comment. And legal experts say those who do cover travel expenses for abortion services could be exposed to lawsuits or potential criminal liability. California is a sanctuary state for abortion rights, and residents are bracing for the cost of people from other states seeking services.
It unfairly redistributes the burden of that health care to states that are still, pro-women.
In states like Mississippi, where the last abortion clinic will close within days, those travel expenses could be considerable. Every neighboring state is also banning abortion, so women will have to fly or drive long distances for the procedure. Trinity Chavez, CBS News, New York.
And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like